Give me permission. Okay, fine.
Yes, I start recording. So this is the basic 2 by 2 table, which is essential for all calculations related to association, in which we draw a 2 by 2 table in this way, where risk factor if it's present, risk factor not present, disease present, and disease not present. So this is the table which we'll be using in our discussions further also. So first we come to relative risk. Relative risk is used in cohort studies where denominator can be defined. So in cohort studies, the incidence can be defined and hence relative risk can be used. So how do we define relative risk is risk in exposed divided by risk in unexposed patients. So when we go back to the 2 by 2 table, so we see here risk in exposed by risk in patients who are not exposed to the risk factor. So it is A by A plus B, A by A plus B by C plus D. And this gives the relative risk. So relative risk of greater than 1 indicates a positive association. Relative risk of less than 1 indicates a negative association. And if it equals 1, then it shows that there is no association between the risk factor and the disease. So usually confidence intervals are given for every value, be it risk ratio or odds ratio. The confidence interval can vary, it is a range, and it can vary from any a positive number more than 0. So if there is a confidence interval which is ranging from 0.5 to 1.5 and the relative risk is 1.2, then it would indicate that the result is not significant because 1 is also part of the confidence interval, and this shows that the study will not be significant and hence there is no association. So now we come to attributable risk. So attributable risk indicates to what extent the disease under study can be attributed to the exposure. So it is incidence in exposed minus incidence in patients who are not exposed to the disease divided by incidence in exposed into 100. So as we see here, A by A plus B is the incidence in exposed, C by C plus D is the incidence in not exposed. So in this way, we can calculate attributable risk. It is important to calculate attributable risk because even in the patients who are exposed to the risk factor, the risk which exists in the patients who are not exposed to the risk factor also exists. So once we negate that risk, then it shows the actual risk which is associated only with the risk factor. And hence it also shows that how much the disease can be reduced if the risk factor is kept in check. For example, here we've taken a cohort of 10,000 patients and who were followed for a period of 10 years. Out of which 7,000 were smokers and we have 3,000 non-smokers. These habits were not present earlier, but over the period of 10 years, they have developed it. So it's a cohort study. So how do we calculate relative risk and attributable risk? So as we know, this would be A, B, C, T. So A by A plus B would be 70 by 7,000 divided by C by C plus D. So this gives a relative risk of 10%. Relative risk of 10. So a smoker is 10 times more likely to get lung cancer than a non-smoker. And however, we come to attributable risk. So here we see that even non-smoker also gets lung cancer. So the risk in non-smoker is 3 by 3,000. So now we negate 3 by 3,000 from 70 by 7,000. So this would be 10 minus 1 by 10. And hence this would give an attributable risk of 90%. So in this study, we can tell that 90% of the 90% of the lung cancer in the smoker group is attributed to smoking, while the 10% is related to other factors, which are common for both the groups. Now we come to another term called absolute risk reduction. So this is just the reduction in the probability of getting the disease. It is incidence in exposed minus incidence in not exposed. And from this, we also derive a term called number needed to treat, which is 100 divided by absolute risk reduction. So number needed to treat is a term which is useful in randomized control studies, where a certain drug, if it is introduced, it shows us that if how many patients are treated with the particular drug, we can see a positive or a benefit in the patients. So we'll come to an example. 200 women had vaginal candidiasis were selected and randomized into two groups. So one group was given oral antifungals and the other group was given placebo. So there are a total of 200 patients. And the oral antifungal group, both of them are equally distributed. So it is 100 and 100. Now here it's written that 80 patients in intervention group and 60 patients in placebo group showed improvement. So here we see that we've marked improvement and not improvement are the columns. So hence we've created a 2 by 2 table. 80 is the number of patients in group 1 who have showed improvement, and 60 is the number of patients in placebo group who have showed improvement. So absolute risk reduction, which we've seen here, is incidence in exposed minus incidence in not exposed. So it is A by A plus B minus C by C plus D. So this is A, B, C, D. Hence we come to a value of 80 by 100 minus 60 by 100. So it is 0.2. And from here, we also derive the value number needed to treat. Like I've said, number needed to treat would come by dividing 1 by 0.2. So it is 5. So if we treat 5 patients with the oral antifungals, then we will be able to see the benefit in 1 patient over placebo. This is what number needed to treat means. The same way can also be, there is another term called number needed to harm. And that is used in cases where instead of improvement, if we have to show some certain complications of using a drug or death, etc. So we've used risk ratio and relative risk and attributable risk in cohort studies. Now we come to odds ratio. So case control is a type of study where it's a retrospective study where we select cases and then we select controls which are well matched, and we decide the number of controls we select. Like if there is one case, then we can select between 1 to 4 controls for each case. So we are determining the total number of the patients in the study. So this means that we cannot get an incidence from this study because the number is something which we have chosen. So number of people who have the disease by total number of population, the denominator is not defined because it is something we have chosen, and hence incidence won't work. So in this case, hence we can't use relative risk in case control studies. So hence there is another thing called odds ratio. Now first we'll define probability and odds. So if I'm doing a coin toss, the probability of getting a heads or tails is 1 by 2. There are 2 events and each event has 1 by 2, equal probability. However, odds is the probability of one event happening divided by the probability of other event happening. So if there are 2 events happening which have equal probability, it would be 1 by 2 divided 1 by 2. So it will be 1. So here we see that probability is 1 by 2 while odds is 1. So now we come to odds ratio. So here, instead of, while in relative risk, we've used A by A plus B. But in odds ratio, we use A by B. This is the formula for odds because 2 things can happen. Either you can get the disease or you can't get the disease. So it is A by B. And similarly, now we see odds ratio in exposed by odds ratio in not exposed. So it will be A by B divided by C by D. So it is AD by BC, and hence it is also called the cross product ratio. Since it is the product of AD divided by BC. Now we come to an example. A case control study was done to assess smoking as a risk factor for lung cancer. So 35 cases were there and 82 well-matched controls were included. So the total number of cases is 35. Total number of controls were 82, in which 33 and 55. 33 cases and 55 controls smoked cigarettes. So this is 33, this is 55. So clearly this 82 is the number that we have chosen, and hence incidence won't work here. And it's a case control study, so we automatically use odds ratio. So odds ratio for this would be AD by BC, which is 33 into 27 divided by 55 into 2. So we'll get a value of 8.1. Now we come to correlation. Correlation indicates the degree of association between two characteristics. A correlation coefficient, which is labeled as R, it can range from -1 to +1. So a correlation could be a positive correlation or negative correlation, and the maximum correlation that can happen is 1. It can be, if it's positive, then it will be +1. If it is negative, it will be -1. So yeah, like it is indicated by R. And then R square is the coefficient of determination. If there are two variables, this is X, this is Y is dependent on X, and there is a linear correlation between the two. So the correlation would be R. So what is R square? R square shows that the how much the change in Y is determined by X. So R square is the value which will quantify that relation. How much of the change in Y is determined by X. So this is called coefficient of determination. There are two major correlation coefficients we use. One is Pearson correlation, one is Spearman correlation. Both are different coefficients which are used in different scenarios. If Y and X both are continuous or discrete variables which are both have a normal distribution, then we can use a Pearson correlation coefficient. However, if the data is ordinal, or if it is not normally distributed, like if it is a skewed distribution or positive skewed or negative skewed, or if it is ordinal data, that is which is not numerical data but data which can be ranked, then we can use Spearman correlation coefficient. However, the interpretation of them is the same way as R is done. So like I said, data is divided into qualitative and quantitative. In qualitative, we have nominal data and ordinal data. In quantitative, we have discrete and continuous, and it also has interval and ratio. So nominal data is labeling anything like gender, male and female. They cannot be ordered in a they cannot be arranged in a particular order. So they are just names. So this is nominal data. Ordinal data is also like nominal data. However, it can be arranged. Like if I say LKG, UKG, middle school and high school. So these things can be arranged in order. However, we don't know what is the difference between these two. It cannot be quantified, and they are not numericals. So this is an ordinal data. Now we come to quantitative data, in which discrete and continuous can be there. So discrete data is in which decimals cannot be there, while continuous is something which is continuous. Like in discrete data, we'll only have whole numbers, while in continuous data, we can have any number. Then again, there is interval data and ratio. The difference between interval and ratio is, in interval, absolute zero is not defined. In ratio, absolute zero is defined. Hence, division of data, Y by X is possible here. However, Y by X is not possible here. However, in both interval and ratio, we know the difference between each consecutive data is equal, which is not the case in qualitative data. So now we come to regression. So anyway, this data in which for ordinal data and for quantitative data which is not normally distributed, we use Spearman correlation coefficient. And however, if it is a quantitative data which has a normal distribution, we use Pearson. So regression. Correlation measures the strength of association between variables. Now regression is the mathematical equation that quantifies the association. So regression line is the best fit of line through the data points. I'll show you the data points. And regression coefficient gives the slope of the graph in that it gives the change in value of one outcome per unit change in the other outcome. So here we see these are data points which correspond with HbA1c and fasting blood glucose. So this is a scatter plot. We see various data points. Now through all of this data, a line is drawn. This is called a regression line. Now we know the equation of a straight line in a graph is y equal to mx plus c. So where c is a constant, this value, x is the value of here blood glucose, where y is HbA1c, and m is the slope, which will determine this. This is m, the slope. So the slope is called regression coefficient. Here in this, we can see that this constant is 3.2. So C is 3.2 plus M is 0.45 into blood glucose. So here we see that regression coefficient is 0.5. Similarly, these are other scatter plots which also show, like in this we can draw an imaginary line like this. This shows a positive correlation and the correlation will be 0.88. And similarly here we see initially these are higher numbers and they're decreasing. So this would be a negative correlation and this is minus 0.34. So correlation could be negative or positive, and it could be between 0 and 1. And the closer it is to 1, it means it has a stronger correlation. So none of these measures of association I've told determine causation. Causation is separate, and there is a separate Hills criteria which will determine causation. However, none of these measures of association will determine causation, but causation will determine association. There is another concept called Cox proportional hazard regression. So it is a method of investigating the effect of several variables upon the time a specified event takes to happen. Usually, the event which we are waiting to happen is a death or a complication. And we want to see the effect of several variables upon this event. So this there is a complicated mathematical equation for this, which is computed. The important thing is hazard ratio. This is the value that is finally obtained. So I'll explain with an example. So an analysis is conducted to investigate differences in all-cause mortality between men and women participating in the Framingham Heart Study, adjusting for age. So there were total 5,180 participants who were aged more than 45 years, and they were followed up for a period of 10 years, or death, whichever comes earlier. Now 46% of the sample is male, and the mean age of the sample is 56.8 years, which is both male and female included. So 54% are females, 46 of males, and the average of the entire sample study is 56.8 years. And ages range from 45 to 82. This is the sample. We've seen the ages range from 45 to 82. So out of 5,180 participants, 402 deaths were observed. Now this is the normal data. Here the mean age. The mean age of the entire population is 56.8. However, if we classify the entire population into people who have died and people who do not die, so the mean age in people who have died is 65.6, while the average is 56, and people who do not die is close to 56. And percentage of male, while in the entire population is 46. In death, in people who've died, it is 55%, which is much higher than the average. And who do not die, it is 45, which is much closer to 46. So Cox proportional hazard is estimated. We get a parameter like this, which is significant. So now an exponential value of this is obtained, which will be 1.118, 1.973. All these are complex mathematical equations, which I do not want to go into, or nor do I understand. So the interpretation of this exponential value of this. So if we take death, keeping the sex as constant, if we keep male sex as constant, and if we just see how age is influencing death, we can see a parameter estimate of 0.11 and 49, which exponentially equal to 1.118. So this is the hazard ratio. It shows that there is 11.8% increase in expected hazard relative to 1 year increase in age. Similarly, if we keep age as constant and just keep male sex as the variable, so for every one increase in male sex, there would be 97% increase in expected hazard. So this is how Cox proportional hazard regression is interpreted. Okay, now that we're done with measures of association, we'll come to parameters of diagnostic tests.
Sorry, Ritvik, can you just go back again?
Okay.
On the. Can you just explain this again, Parmas? No, the next slide. Exam,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. So this is the normal data that we've obtained from the study, in which the males are 55% in the population who die. In the 402, there is 55% constitute male, and who do not die, it is 45% of males. So this is much higher than the average 46% were male in the entire study. And similarly, the average age was 56. However, in the population which dies, the age was 65.6. So just looking at this, we know that age is something which is positively associated with death. And again, male sex is also associated. So now there is a mathematical formula which estimates, which gives this estimate. So we get this value after Cox proportional hazard regression formula is used. This value is obtained.
Yeah, okay.
So we get a value of 0.111, and with male sex is 0.67. So again, here we see that male sex influences death much more than age in this particular study. Now we do an exponential of this. Exponential is there is Euler's number, some 2.3 something. So 2.3 to the power of 0.11149. So then we'll get this value of 1.118. Then similarly, 2.3 to the power of 0.679, we'll get a value of 1.9. So what this is a ratio, sir, hazard ratio, which shows that if the hazard ratio is 1.118 for with respect to age, then the hazard increases 11.8% with each increased age. Like if the person's age is 66 instead of 65, then there is 11.8% increase in the risk of death. Then similarly, if there are 402 males, and if it has become 403 males, then that person will have a 97% increase in risk of death. That is what hazard ratio means. Now we come to the parameters of diagnostic test. So again, we draw a 2x2 table here. However, it is slightly different. In the association, we've seen between risk factors and the disease. Here we want to see this is the diagnostic test, and here there will be the gold standard test, which will definitively show that it has a disease, does not have disease. And this is the test in talk which we want to discuss about. These are the diagnostic tests. So there is true positive, false positive. If there is a disease and the test also comes positive, it is true positive. If the test is positive, however, there is no disease, then it is false positive. Both, if test is negative, but however disease is positive, then it is a false negative. And again, if both are negative, it's a true negative. So now we come to the parameters of diagnostic tests. Now sensitivity. Sensitivity is the probability that a deceased individual will be identified by the test. So the deceased individuals are true positive plus false negative. It is A plus C, out of which A is identified by the test. So sensitivity is A by A plus C. Now specificity. It is the probability that an individual without the disease will be identified as such by the test. So an individual without the disease. So the total number of people who are without the disease are FP plus TN, it is C plus D. Out of which the test has identified only D as the patients who do not have the disease. So specificity is D by C plus D. Now a perfect test would have both B and C equal to 0, and hence giving a sensitivity and specificity both of 100. Now there are other terms like false positivity rate, which is 1 minus specificity, which is basically specificity D by V plus D, and the rate of false positive. This is B by V plus D, and then again false negative rate is 1 minus sensitivity. Now other important values are positive predictive value. So if we see here, the total number of patients who come who test positive with the test is true positive plus false positive. However, that only true positives are the disease. That is, A has the disease out of A plus B. So positive predictive value is A by A plus B. Similarly, negative predictive value would be true negative by total population which has shown negative with the test. So it will be D by C plus D. Now we take an example. So a researcher develops a new saliva pregnancy test. She collects sample from 100 women known to be pregnant by blood test. So this is the gold standard. Beta HCG must have been checked, and 100 women who are known not to be pregnant. So both. So here we get total number of. And the saliva test is positive in 95 of the pregnant women, and it is also positive in 15 of the non-pregnant women. So total number of pregnant women were 100, not pregnant were 100. And saliva test is a diagnostic test we want to see. So it shows pregnancies as 95, and it shows total 95 plus 15, out of which the gold standard shows that these were pregnant and these were not pregnant. So A is 95, B is 15, C and D. Okay. So sensitivity is again out of the total pregnant number of patients shown positive by the test. So total pregnant are 100, out of which 95 were shown to be pregnant. So it is 95%. And specificity, we see a total negative shown by the test, 85, by total number of patients who are not pregnant. So 85%. So the sensitivity and specificity of the test are 95% and 85% respectively. For a test, what is more important, sensitivity or specificity? So for each test, it has to be taken up case by case. So if it is a screening test, we want it to be more sensitive because we want to catch more number of people who could have the disease. And then if it is a diagnostic test, we want it to be more specific. In ideal scenario, we would want both. Any test would to have maximum sensitivity and specificity, 100. However, that is not positive. So we have to take care. I mean, we have to see case by case scenario. Here, if a cheap mass screening test should be sensitive, and so that as little cases are missed, and a test which is designed to confirm the presence of disease, it should be more specific so that people who do not have the disease should not be diagnosed as to have the disease. So here there's another example in which the same saliva pregnancy test. So a refined version is developed. You add a drop of indicator solution to the saliva sample. So it can stay clear, 0, or turn green, red, or black. So it will show 1 plus, 2 plus, or 3 plus. So we have, instead of just putting a positive or negative, we've given a range for saliva test positivity. So now we again draw a table. This is not a 2 by 2 table because there are just not 2 values, but there are multiple values. So first we come to saliva, the test shows 0, no color. And we have the gold standard test values with us. So 2 patients who were pregnant showed no color, and 68 patients who were pregnant, not pregnant, showed no color. Ideally, we would want 100 patients who are not pregnant to show no color, and 0 patients who are pregnant to show no color, but that is not the case. Then again, 1 plus, there were 3, 17, 10, 10, 85, 5. So the question is, now this is done for research purposes. However, if we have to do it in a lab setting, which number would we choose to have for it to be a diagnostic test? We'll see here. So if positive is taken as greater than equal to 1 plus. So from here on, if we take, if any color in the saliva test is shown, if it is taken as positive. So according to it, the total number of pregnancy will be 85 plus 10 plus 3. And total number of pregnancies were 100. Now we can form a 2 by 2 table. So it would be 98 by 100. So sensitivity is 98%, and specificity, we've only seen 68 to be negative here because all this is positive. So 68 by 100, 68%. Now, however, if we take 2 plus to be positive as a diagnosis for pregnancy, then sensitivity would be 95%. However, specificity is increased, 85%. Then again, if we take positivity as 3 plus, sensitivity increases while, sensitivity decreases, however, specificity increases. So depending on if you want this to be a screening test, then you would want this value. And if you would want a diagnostic test, you would want this value. Or you could settle with these values. So this is what this table shows, a bimodal distribution of data. Like if all, if the progesterone levels of all the patients were charted who are not pregnant. So there is a continuum in which there is a middle zone of positive patients who, according to our cutoffs, will be counted as negative, and there are patients who are not pregnant who will be counted as positive based on our cutoffs. So this is a continuum, and in which we have to choose from where we want to count as positive, this, or this. So this depends on various factors. So one of the important factors is adverse effects of false results. That means either if it is shown that it is a negative in spite of it being a positive, or positive in spite of being negative. So if you don't want to miss anyone, if it is a very dangerous disease and you don't want to miss anyone, you should use higher sensitivity. However, if we consider that the treatment is much more dangerous, and if a patient who does not have the disease is labeled to have the disease, then it will be an issue. Then you would want a much more higher specific test. So that's how you would decide between sensitivity and specificity, cutoffs of various tests. So positive and negative predictive values. So we've learned what positive predictive value is and negative predictive value is. It is A by A plus B and C by C plus, D by C plus D. So these values are not characteristic of the test, but however, they change with the population in which the test is being used. So here we'll understand few terms. Pre-test probability. In any population, pre-test probability is usually the prevalence of disease. Like if we say, I want to do a test in a sample A, and prevalence of diabetes in the population is 2%. So the pre-test probability would be 2%. Sensitivity and specificity of the test are constant, and they do not change with the population it is being tested in. But however, the pre-test probability is again prevalence. But however, the positive and negative predictive values change according to the population in which it is done. So it is prevalence. Okay, so here we are checking pre-test probability of pregnancy in two populations. In one population which is using oral contraceptives, and in another population who are not using any kind of contraceptives. So here only we understand in the population who do not use any oral contraceptives, we expect the number of pregnancies to be higher. And however, who are using the number of pregnancy would be lower, and using no form of contraceptives, the number of pregnancies will be higher. So the same saliva pregnancy test is administered 30 days after last menstrual period. So in group 1, in which they are not using any contraception, where we expect the pregnancy to be higher. So the pretest probability, hypothetically, we think that, okay, maybe 40% would be pregnant. All of these are sexually active young women, so 40% would be pregnant. So the test sensitivity and specificity is 95 and 85, as you've seen earlier. So expected true positivity based on this. So if we see 1,000 populations, out of which we are expecting 400 to be positive. So this is 400 total pregnant. This is based on our study, in which true positive would be 95% of it, 380, and false negative would be 20. Then specificity of 85, we see who are testing positive would be 90, and testing negative would be 5. Now here we see a positive predictive value, which is 380 by 380 plus 90. So 380 by 470, it is 81%. So in this context, what does positive predictive value mean? If a lady has done this particular pregnancy test and it has turned out to be positive, then it means she has 81% chance of being actually pregnant. And however, negative predictive value is 96%. So a woman with a negative saliva test has 96% chance of not being pregnant. Now in the group 2, we see that oral contraceptive users who are using OCPs, so the number of pregnancy would be lower. So we are expecting it to be 10%. Now 10% of 1,000 is 100, 900. We do a 2 by 2 table, and using the same mechanism we did earlier, we get these following values. So here positive predictive value is 95 by 95 plus 135. It would be 95 by 230. It is 41%, which is much lesser in this population than compared to the other population. Well, negative predictive value is 99. So here we see an association that positive predictive value, it changes with pretest probability. Like I've said here, if the pretest probability is higher in a population, then positive predictive value increases. So unlike sensitivity and specificity, which are constant for a disease, for a test, positive and negative predictive values vary according to the population in which the test is being performed. So ideally, we would want a pretest probability to be in between 10 and 40%, because there is huge variation between this and this. So yeah, tests are more useful when pretest probability is in middle range. Now we come to another term called likelihood ratio. So likelihood ratio is another thing which is constant for a test, and it is defined by the formula probability of the test result. Like if we say likelihood ratio of a positive test, that means positivity of probability of positive test in patients with disease by probability of test result in patients without disease. So it would be okay, 2 by 2 table we've drawn. This is true positive, false negative, false positive, true negative. So probability of test result in people with disease. Patients who have disease are A plus C, in which positive test is A. So A by A plus C, which is basically sensitivity, divided by probability of test result in people without disease. So in patients who are not having the disease, B number of people out of B plus D get a positive result. So it is B by B plus D. So likelihood of a positive test is basically sensitivity, and B by B plus D is nothing but 1 minus D by B plus D, which is specificity. So sensitivity divided by 1 minus specificity. This is the likelihood ratio. So this basically tells that if I get a positive test, then if the likelihood ratio for positive test is 2, then it means I'm twice as likely to have the disease than not have the disease. That is how it is interpreted. So usually when there are two outcomes of test, like I've said, for a positive test, you are calculating sensitivity by 1 minus specificity. And for a negative likelihood ratio, we calculate by 1 minus sensitivity by specificity. Okay, now we are imagining a blood test for gastric cancer, and in which we've tried out on 100 patients admitted with hematemesis. The actual presence of gas or absence of gastric cancer was diagnosed from endoscopic findings and biopsies. So this is the gold standard, presence or absence. And our blood result is the diagnostic test we want to test. So this is the 2x2 table which we have obtained from the results. Now sensitivity here, again, it is A by A plus C. So 0.8. So if gastric cancer is present, there is 80% chance in the test picking it up. And specificity is 45 by 75. 45 by 45 plus 30, 0.6. Now positive predictive value. Positive predictive value would be 20 by all the patients who have tested positive, it is 20 plus 30. So it is 40%. So if the test is positive, then there is 40% chance that the patient actually has gastric cancer. Now we come to negative predictive value, in which it would be 45 negative by all the negative, 45 plus 5. So it is 45 by 50 equal to 0.9. So 90% negative predictive value. Now we come to likelihood ratio. So we've simplified likelihood ratio into this formula, sensitivity by 1 minus specificity. So sensitivity we've seen is 0.8, specificity 0.6. So the likelihood ratio is 2. So this means that if the test is positive in a patient, the patient is twice as likely to have gastric cancer than not have it. This again is the same representation of that data. Now, likelihood ratios help in computing post-test odds easily. So like I've told, pre-test probability is nothing but prevalence. But however, if I've given this person the test which we are testing, what is the probability that if the test is positive, he has a disease? So that is called post-test probability. Now, odds and probabilities are two different terms which will change the way how we compute this. So now likelihood ratios have various advantages, which I'll explain in detail. So they can deal with tests which have more than two possible outcomes. So 2x2 tables can only be drawn if an outcome is positive or negative. However, if it is a range, like we've seen with the 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus saliva test, then we can't determine sensitivity and specificity unless we take a particular cutoff. So we are losing valuable data while we do this. I'll again explain this. Then again, magnitude of likelihood ratio. So if the likelihood ratio we've determined, in the previous example, we've seen a likelihood ratio of 2. Imagine if the likelihood ratio was 12. So it gives us a sense of which test is much more positive and which will give a much stronger result or much stronger evidence that he has a certain disease. And again, other very important thing is, if there is a person, I give him test 1, then I give him test 2. So I can just multiply the likelihood ratio to get the post-test probability in this way. Pre-test probability, which is prevalence into likelihood ratio of first test into second test and third test and so on. So hence multiple tests can also be used, in which we can tell directly the post-test probability of all the tests included. So hence likelihood ratios have various advantages. So we'll consider an example. So here we're using antinuclear antibody test and diagnosis of SLE. In a rheumatology practice, the prevalence that they have seen normally is 2.8. So this is pre-test probability. The sensitivity of ANA for SLE is 98% and specificity 93%. This is of the test. They've already seen that this test has particular sensitivity specificity. Also with this, the likelihood ratios will also be given. Suppose a patient has a positive ANA, what is the probability of SLE? So basically they are asking what the post-test probability is if the test comes positive. So we draw a 2x2 table. imagining there is 1 lakh population, because they haven't given us any population number. So 2822, and because the prevalence is 2.88%. So we calculate this 2822, and then hence we fill up the entire table based on this. Now the likelihood ratio of a positive ANA test is 14. This is also fixed of the test and which is already given to us. And the likelihood ratio of a negative ANA test is 0.02. So now pre-test probability is 2.88%, which is basically 0.0288. Now, however, likelihood ratio is used to calculate odds, pre-test odds equal to, post-test odds equal to likelihood ratio into pre-test odds. So now, first we have to convert probability into odds. Probability is just 0.288 by 1. However, odds is 0.0288 divided by 1 minus 0.0288. So we'll get a value of 0.03. Now, post-test odds will be pre-test odds into likelihood ratio of a positive test, since the patient has got positive. So we'll get a number of 0.42. So this is the odds of the patient having a positive thing. However, it is easier to interpret if it is converted into probability. So again, we use this formula. Probability is odds divided by 1 plus odds. So post-test probability would be 0.42 divided by 1.42, 29.6. So this is the post-test probability. Now, what is post-test probability? Post-test probability is nothing but positive predictive value. A by A plus B is post-test probability. But however, here we've calculated without using a sensitivity or specificity, without drawing a 2 by 2 table. So it is said that the likelihood ratio is much more easier to compute post-test, the positive predictive value of a test, once you get used to it. Now the second example where I said if a 2 by 2 table is drawn if a test is either positive or negative. But however, what if the tests are graded? So we often, so we are considering 2 patients with suspected hypothyroidism. One has a T4 value of 5, the other has a T4 value of 9. Our cutoff is 4.5. So both patients would be normal according to us, the 5% and the 9%. However, if we look at it, maybe we'll think this person is more likely to be hypothyroid than the second. But using sensitivity and specificity based on cutoffs. So if we take 4.5 as the cutoff, having the disease and not having the disease, we get the same post-test probabilities. Here we can use likelihood ratio. So there was a study which was done. They measured T4 and TSH values in ambulatory patients with suspected hypothyroidism and used TSH as gold standard for determining which patients were truly hypothyroid. So total there were 32 hypothyroid, 93 euthyroid, and based on T4 values, they have been classified in this. So now since there are more than 2 values, we cannot calculate sensitivity and specificity. So we calculate likelihood ratio. So likelihood ratio, for example, if you want to calculate likelihood ratio of this, if the positive test taken as 5 or less, then likelihood ratio would be 18 by 32 divided by 1 by 93. So that's where we'll get a likelihood ratio of 52. Similarly, we calculate likelihood ratio of each cutoff. So now if we take the pretest probability or prevalence of hypothyroidism in the population is 0.1, now we can calculate post-test probability according to the values of T4. Not just all of these would have had a post-test probability of similar value. However, now that we have classified this into different categories and all of them have different likelihood ratios, each of them has a different post-test probability. So that is how likelihood ratios can be used. Now finally, we come to receiver operator characteristics. So this curve is used to determine which test is good and which test is bad. So basically, now true positive rate is just sensitivity, and false positive rate is just 1 minus specificity. Now here, there is a midline. So if we take a particular test, And based on different cutoffs, we have a particular sensitivity of this and specificity of this. Then again, if we take another cutoff, then we'll have this. So different cutoffs will have different sensitivity, specificity of a test. Like if in saliva test, if we take 1+, the sensitivity was much higher. So sensitivity would be higher. It would be somewhere here. In other test, sensitivity will be lower. Maybe it will be in a different way. So in this way, we mark various points, and we draw a line through all these points. Now we get a curve. So ideally, if a test is 100% sensitive and 100% specific, so this is 1 minus specificity. So 1 minus 1, and sensitivity should be 1. So this should be 0 and this should be 1. So this is the perfect test. This is what we want all the tests to be near to. However, none of the tests will be there. So once we compute different tests, it will be like this. So how do we say which test is good? So any test which is close to this midline, it has a 50-50 chance. So if the test is positive, it could either be true or not true in 50% cases. So it is a worthless test. This midline is a worthless test. Now here, so this would cover the area 50% approximately. Now if there is another test, now this would cover an area of maybe 60%, which is a good test. Now this would cover an area of 80%. So this is a better test. So for various diagnostic tests, like if there is hypothyroidism and I want to use different diagnostic tests, in one I use T4, in one I use only TSH. So which of the tests, all of these will have a different ROC curve, and whichever occupies the most area is known to be a better test. So that's how ROC curves are interpreted. So these are all the parameters of diagnostic tests. Thank you.
Thanks, Ritvik. Very nice presentation. Very good teaching skills you have. Especially like the, you're actually, using a free hand thing to explain to us. So I think it's a very nice presentation. Yes. So what resource have you used for this?
I've used.
I think you should share the resource, because all this, when you are not using it regularly in your research, you tend to forget it.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So is there a referral resource one, which is easy to, like the way you made it easy? Is there something for surgeon?
I've used some 2 or 3 books, sir. I'll share all those books.
Yeah, you show the resources. And secondly, yeah. So I think one of the best examples of a sensitivity versus specificity is the current COVID tests. I think the current antibody tests, which is being proposed for, actually now we are planning, if you are looking at resumption of surgery, we're looking for a most sensitive test. So antibody test, which is very sensitive, and then those are which are positive are to be confirmed by the PCR test, which is very specific but with a high rate of false negative. It's a very classic example of high sensitivity and high specificity. Both the tests have different sort of sensitivity and specificity, and a combination is being suggested for now screening of all the surgical patients, at least in the near future. So I think that's a very classic example.
Yes,
I think the ROC curves are very important to understand, because a lot of us use tests which gives a range of value. I think the example is classically the FibroScan study we've been doing, where it gives a range of values and we have to compare with the gold standard biopsy.
Okay.
So I think all us we come across these ROC curves very frequently in papers and research papers, and I think we must know more about it.
Okay.
So I think that's a very good presentation. I have gained quite a bit from this. So I hope others have.